Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Megan Doherty, the director of the Museum of the White Mountains. As we gather today, we're all on Indigenous lands. Those of us at the Museum of the White Mountains are on Indocunan, which is the ancestral and present homelands of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples. We're grateful for their stewardship of these lands and waterways. For those of you on Zoom, we've put some links in the chat where you can learn more about the Indigenous histories of your place at native-land.ca, as well as the Abenaki peoples of Northern New England through the Musée des Abenaki in Quebec. As you may already know, as part of my research for our summer exhibition, I've been learning about efforts to preserve the culturally important brown ash tree, which is under threat from the emerald ash borer. And save the date for May 31st at 4 p.m. so you can join us for the opening reception of baskets and borers. I'm delighted tonight to have Sarah Garlick join us for our final Mountain Voices event of the academic year. We started planning this year's series on conservation in the White Mountains shortly after Sarah joined the Nature Conservancy as Director of Conservation in New Hampshire. So I knew we needed to invite her. Understandably, she asked for a little time to get settled in her new role before coming to talk with us about it. And so tonight for our final event, where we started with the thin ribbon of land that is the Franconia Ridge Trail, for our first event tonight, we're going to zoom out and think about conservation on a landscape scale. So please join me in welcoming Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, when Megan reached out last year to come to the Museum of the White Mountains, I was like, absolutely yes. And then not long after, we were just talking about, I got like a Facebook memory, one of those notifications that it was 10 years ago that I was here for the opening of the first exhibition at the Museum of the White Mountains that was about the geology of adventure in the Whites. Some of the photos from that are around the room today. So it's just been really fun to come back and remember that, that fun time. But tonight, tonight we're going to talk about some of the similar topics from a just different lens than that geology of the Whites show that was 10 years ago. What we're going to do, as Megan said, is kind of zoom out from where we are in the White Mountains and consider these mountains from their form at the scale of the North American continent. So I work for the Nature Conservancy. We love maps. I love maps. So I'm going to show lots of maps tonight. This is one from NASA. It's a simple shaded relief map. So we're looking at kind of lowlands in the green colors and higher lands in the yellows and tans. And just I want to show this, our kind of home in the White Mountains is part of this chain of mountains that span 2,000 miles from Canada to Alabama. These are the Appalachians or the Appalachians, depending on where you're from. My kind of southern pronunciation is a little bit of a window into my history with this landscape. So I spent my childhood in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Western North Carolina, not far from Mount Mitchell, which is the highest peak in the Appalachians. And now I raise my children and have their childhood in the eastern part of the White Mountains here in New Hampshire, just at the base of Mount Bartlett over in North Conway. And kind of spanning these two chapters of my life, I had the privilege of walking the spine of these mountains along the Appalachian Trail from Maine to Georgia when I was in college. And so when I think of this landscape, it's a landscape of my heart and of my life. And I think lots of folks who live here or visit these mountains have that same kind of connection. And it turns out this landscape is also a critically important place for the world, for people and for nature, as we grapple with the changing climate. And so that's really the story I want to talk about tonight. So this is just one illustration of that point. This is a map of above ground forest carbon stocks in the continental US. And you can see the green of the forests in the Appalachians just pop right out of this map. So this area encircled in red is less than 8% of the contiguous US in terms of land area, but it helps store nearly a quarter of the above ground carbon. So as we think about conserving and managing these forests, we have the opportunity to kind of keep that resource intact. And so that brings me to start with, like, fundamentally what underlies the work we do at the Nature Conservancy. As Megan said, I've been with the Nature Conservancy for just a year, almost exactly, which this is a global organization. We work in 77 countries. We have 5,000 employees. It takes a really long time to be onboarded in a global organization. So I think I have 2 more years of being a new person. But everything we do in this global organization is toward addressing the twin biodiversity and climate crises that we face, and the actions we need to do now in this decade to ensure a future where people and nature thrive together. As I said, it's just been a year since I've been working for the Nature Conservancy, and this slide here, will take a few minutes to go through it, is probably what I find the most inspiring about working for this organization. This is one single framework that unifies all 5,000 employees of TNC towards having a global impact. So these are 6 targets that we're all working toward to 2030. So in the carbon mitigation space, reducing or storing 3 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions yearly. That's the same as taking 650 million cars off the road every year. We have a target of benefiting 100 million people who are at severe risk of climate emergencies like droughts and floods and fires, conserving at least 10% of our ocean area with improved management and conservation, 650 million hectares of healthy lands. That's an area twice the size of India. Conserving 1 million kilometers of river systems and 30 million hectares of lakes and wetlands, so enough river length to stretch around the world 25 times. And finally, supporting the leadership of 45 million people from local and indigenous communities whose well-being and livelihoods depends on these healthy oceans, freshwaters, and lands. So to me, having a single unifying framework that we can all kind of work together toward to have a global impact is kind of what makes me excited about working here in New Hampshire, but really working at this landscape scale in the Appalachians. So the Appalachian landscape is one of 4 places on the globe where the Nature Conservancy has identified as really being most important for reaching those 2030 targets. So along with the Amazon, Kenya, the Kalimantan in Indonesia, here we have just these mountains right here in our backyard as a focal place for this organization. So I think if there's one thing I hope you take away from this program, it's that we might just sort of think of these mountains here in our backyard, but they are globally important and they're part of this bigger landscape. So I'll dig a little bit more into some of the science of that global significance, and then we'll talk about some of the conservation actions that the Nature Conservancy is working on at that scale. So this is, I showed you the carbon stocks map. This is a map of the historic extent of the temperate broadleaf forests. These are our forests, not the northern boreal forest, not the tropical forest, but those deciduous forests in our mid-latitudes. And this is the historic extent. And this is the extent today. And you can see the Appalachians and parts of rural China are really those major intact sections of this forest. And the good news is that the Appalachians is still a largely intact and connected landscape. Forests are at the core of our work in the Appalachians. So this map is going to help me pull together some additional threads of our work. So we'll start with the kind of bluish gray color. It's labeled as the Appalachian waterscape on this map. These are the lands and waters that make up the freshwater systems at this continental scale. So just a few examples of how important these freshwater systems are. Close to 80% of the species, freshwater fish species in Canada and the US live in the Southern Appalachians. Freshwater mussel diversity in this landscape is unmatched globally, and the headwater streams throughout the Appalachians, particularly in New Hampshire, provide the cold water habitats that are critically important for species now and also thinking in the future as the air temperatures warm. And so I'll move to the areas in green. They're labeled as the resilient and connected lands. A group of scientists, 150, I think, researchers working together over about 10 years, work to identify the lands that have the best chance of remaining healthy in a changing climate. So lands that have enough diversity of elevation, slope, aspect, and soils type to allow plants and animals and other organisms to kind of adapt and move as the climate changes. This is what we call our resilient and connected network of lands. And that's really some of our conservation targets. And you can see across the Appalachians that kind of unbroken chain of those resilient lands. And this network is already in motion. This is a pretty cool model of the movements of mammals, birds, and amphibians in response to climate change. And you can see this kind of corridor. We call this like our superhighway for animals and as the climate changes along the Appalachians. Okay, returning to this map again. I want to point out the kind of white dots are a little bit hard to see from afar, and the orange. What's maybe one of the greatest gifts of the Appalachians are the benefits it provides to people. So there's 22 million people who live within this landscape, and about 105 million people who depend on the Appalachians for lots of different services, including clean water, and they live within a 2-hour drive. So this is a human landscape as well. The forests in this landscape provide 1.8 billion tons of oxygen per year, generates $25 billion in recreational and tourism economies, not to mention other land-based economies like energy production and timber. And it's a landscape of people that I think you all might experience yourselves. So when I think about my time walking on the Appalachian Trail, it was not, I don't think of that as like a deep wilderness experience. I think about it as a walk through America. Like we walked through rural towns in the north and rural towns in the south and small cities and college towns and towns where their economic bottom had dropped out and towns that are experiencing that kind of seasonal boom and bust of tourism. And you just at the scale of a long hike, it felt very connected, even though I think now lots of us feel like, oh, we identify with the White Mountains or the Blue Ridge or the Shenandoah versus the whole range together. And sometimes I wonder if as the climate changes and we're experiencing these big storms, I'll be on a Zoom call with colleagues in Virginia and New Jersey and Vermont and Maine, and we're all experiencing the same storm. And I wonder if some of those connections might become more apparent. But I do think that working in conservation across the scale offers some hope, not only for those of us that are experiencing those storms and impacts, but for the whole planet. So that's what I want to talk about next. This is our vision. This is what success looks like for us in this landscape. In the Appalachians, communities are deeply connected to their natural surroundings and feel inspired and empowered to care for them. The benefits of a 2,000-mile connected network of free-flowing waterways and healthy forests are equitably distributed. Natural and human communities are adapting and thriving as the climate changes. So this is the kind of future that our actions are working toward. And how we'll get to that vision, we talk about 3 key areas of opportunity. We talk about them as connectivity, the 3 C's: connectivity, climate, and communities. So what does a 2,000-mile connected corridor for plants and animals look like? How do we go about making sure that connected fabric is kept intact? Climate, we have a colleague who talks about the carbon stored in Appalachian forests as an insurance policy for the planet. So how do we maximize that insurance coverage? And communities, of course, how do we ensure that we have communities with sustainable livelihoods for people who are able to remain connected and care for their lands? So I'll walk through a few examples of how we're thinking about this at the scale. So this first area of connectivity, the Nature Conservancy has been working in this landscape for about 7 decades. And so we can think about land and water protection as really kind of the bread and butter of an organization that's been doing this work for a long time. And for doing this at scale, one approach is to think about really large land deals. And there are a group of 43 landowners and resource managers that collectively own or manage 11 million acres of lands in the Appalachians. And so rather than having staff in New Hampshire and staff in Tennessee individually work with these large landowners who own and manage land all across the whole landscape, we're working together to have kind of one conversation with those folks and try to work at that kind of portfolio level across the landscape. So there's a lot of exciting opportunities happening in that space. We also know we can't do this alone. This is a, you know, all hands on deck kind of situation. And so we also want to be able to work at that local scale and help conserve like places of local importance and places of local connectivity, which is even more, they might not be the huge, large acres, but they might be really important connectivity parcels. And so we have a grants program for supporting municipalities, local land trusts, other conservation organizations in finishing the deals that they want to get done in their landscapes, and also support in sharing some of our spatial science and spatial resources to help enable some of that work. So this small grants program just rolled out in the northern Appalachian states this year. It was piloted in New York for a while. So just in this year, in the northern states, we've granted out about $1 million to protect about 8,000 acres in 1 year. So we're really hopeful for that to snowball up and continue to increase. Connectivity also means addressing fragmentation by infrastructure like roads. So again, this is a place where kind of working at scale, we have to be working with our state agencies and with our federal agencies to identify kind of those critical spots where we can think about, enlarging culverts and making sure wildlife have passage across this landscape. There's also some training programs actually too. I think that's another kind of fun story. There's a wildlife crossings for transportation workers that we've been piloting in some of the states in the northern Appalachians. Connectivity also matters in the freshwater space. Dams and culverts across the landscape have blocked up and downstream passage for fish and other aquatic species. And like any infrastructure project, these are a big deal. So we take a few approaches to this. One is to target the highest value opportunities as kind of learning and demonstration projects, and then scaling up that learning and demonstration through work with our partners in agencies, state and other NGOs. So this is a photo of the Fisk Mill Dam on the Ashuelot River in Hinsdale, New Hampshire, in southwest New Hampshire. And the Nature Conservancy just bought this dam. We closed on it last fall, and it was quite the process to buy a dam like this. And we're in the process of removing it right now. And you can imagine all kinds of behind the scenes work to purchase and dismantle a dam like this. When it comes out, it will open up 154 miles of river, connecting migratory fish from the Atlantic Basin. This is a tributary of the Connecticut River. And so it's super exciting. But once this dam comes out, it's like a domino effect, allowing the fish to come all the way upstream for new spawning grounds. This is a bit of a busy slide, but I wanted to show it to illustrate, again, how we're trying to work in addition to these big projects like the Fisk Mill Dam in New Hampshire, how we scale up across the region. So we have an initiative called Reconnecting Appalachian Rivers that started a couple years ago, and it's working toward accelerating freshwater connectivity projects across the Appalachian landscape, first by spatial analysis to identify priority locations where restoration of freshwater connectivity, so removing culverts and dams, will benefit both nature and people. So it's using ecological and socio-economic data to kind of identify those areas, and then providing grants to advance a pipeline of freshwater projects. So if folks remember the passage of the we call IRA and Bill, the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's lots of money flowing to shovel-ready infrastructure projects. So what we've been trying to do is do that. There's this bottleneck of work to get projects to that stage of being shovel-ready. So this is a grants program to try to get more of these priority projects ready in the pipeline so they can be eligible for replacement and renewal. Okay.
Click it back and just to.
Like that?
I thought I.
It's okay, you're good.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are some examples in the connectivity space. Moving into the climate space, the Nature Conservancy is really focused on advancing natural climate solutions. So thinking about how we protect, better manage, and restore nature to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and store carbon. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this. One way is through a partnership we've launched with the American Forest Foundation called the Forest Family Carbon Program. This program is focused on family forest owners. So this is a group of nearly 11 million Americans that care for the largest portion of US forests. And so the idea basically is to figure out how to use climate financing to support forest owners in adopting sustainable forestry practices, and hopefully an incentive ultimately to help keep their forests as forests. And you can see this is where this is the kind of current map of where the Family Forest Carbon Program is working. It's been rolling out in the northern Appalachian states and coming toward the southern states. Another area we've been working in the climate space, we know that we need to accelerate renewable energy deployment and also ensure that the development doesn't adversely affect the ecosystems that we're also working so hard to protect and connect. So this is an example in the southern part of the range, or in the central and southern Appalachians. It's an initiative called Mining the Sun. And this is where we're identifying areas like former mine sites where solar, large-scale solar development projects can be developed with minimal impacts to the natural ecosystem. As we think the challenge of siting renewable energy right and having that balance between scaling up the rollout of renewable energy and not having adverse effects to our communities and our ecosystems is complex. And it's an area that I'm really excited that the Nature Conservancy is putting a lot of effort toward this kind of concept of siting it right. Find that, that we can find these areas and we can have renewable development and intact connected ecosystems in the same area. So I'll just give a couple more examples and then we can open it up for some discussion. So I wanted to move to that community opportunities. We talked a bit about some connectivity pieces and some climate opportunities in this landscape. And at the community level, we need to be working at the community level, not at the landscape level. And so, and really recognizing that conservation successes and failures happen here at our local level of our neighborhoods and our towns. And so really infusing the skills and the mindset and the work of we can think about scaling, think about this big landscape, and then ultimately come down to the community level when we're doing the actual program work at the ground. So this is a photo of the town hall in Hinsdale, New Hampshire, where that Fiskmill Dam is. This is a photo I took of an event in October. It's a beautiful town hall. And so by working with leaders of the town and residents, from the very beginning of that project, we identified that residents are excited about the dam removal. They're excited about the fish passage, especially the anglers. And they're also really interested in making sure their water source for their town is secure. They want to make sure they have a nice park along the river. They want to make sure that their buildings and their roads are protected from flood risk. And so kind of through that work and those conversations over time, we're able to kind of build this big infrastructure project with those objectives embedded in them as well, so that we can have this kind of win-win-win for nature, for the community resilience, and for kind of livelihoods and the recreation economy of this town. So I want to zoom down one more level from the community to the family level. And this is a video that kind of, to me, speaks to what conservation action looks like at this scale. These are my children and a family friend, and the sense of kind of infusing a sense of place, infusing a sense of nature at this age. This is on the Sawyer River. Should make you excited about summer. My childhood in the Blue Ridge Mountains looked a lot like that, which is pretty special. So this is just a really funny slide, but I was really reflecting on my job as the director of conservation in New Hampshire, working at this scale and in this big organization. And I don't know if folks remember this bumper sticker from the 70s and 80s, think locally and act locally. I think the world has changed a bit, and I think we have to think globally and act globally. And I think we have to think locally and act locally. And really what I get excited about my job at the Nature Conservancy is I get to really intentionally try to build the arrows across those different ways of thinking and working, and work in an organization that has the infrastructure at the scale to actually do that, which is pretty exciting. And also to recognize that those partners at the community level, at the regional level, at the national level are the way this all happens. So I'm going to stop there for now and then open it up for conversation and questions, because it's just really a fun place to think about. So thank you.
I guess, and I think in some ways, I was very happy when you said, can I be last, or, can we wait a while? Because I think that, what we've been thinking about over the course of this series is both the different scale, but also the different types of organizations. So, we talked about the groups that are working on the Franconia Ridge Trail. We talked about what the Forest Society does and the kind of scale they're working at, and the small land trusts kind of adjacent to the national forest. We talked about the foundation of the national forest. We talked with folks from the county conservation district managers, right? Yeah. So, and thinking also about where does ag fit in all of this, right? We can, that's part of our landscape now. And how do we sort of conserve those lands? What does that look like? What does that mean? What does conservation mean in an ag setting? And what are we doing? And then George came, we talked about, what the AMC is doing. And so all these kind of, I guess I'm wondering sort of how you talked about it a little, but how you interact with these different organizations that are trying to do similar things. How do the kind of mechanics of that work and some of the, I guess I'm just interested to hear about the kind of successes and challenges in those, I just imagine there's lots of gears and they don't always
I love that question. And I love that question because that is something I spend a lot of time thinking about and worrying about and trying to figure out in terms of process. I'm a real strategy and process person. And so there's that side of it, but the answer is really, it happens at lots of different levels, right? So I gave the example of the Fisk Mill Dam project in Hinsdale. So there, right, there's there's an immediate kind of landscape of partners that we think about working with for a specific project. But then that zoom out layer that I was talking about, that's been really fun and really interesting to think about, you know, who's working at the full scale of the continent, who's working in the northern forest region. Like there's several organizations working across the northern forest region, and then within the state. And I don't know, my feeling is that having that real clear framework of our 2030 goals is a real helpful way to just say, this is what we're doing. And if anyone wants to work in this space, like, let's do it together. And it's funny, I like really early on, I met with someone from a land trust, and they were a new kind of community land trust in New Hampshire, and they were like trying to get their footing. And she's like, and we have to compete with other organizations like the Nature Conservancy. I was like, no, there's no, like, we want to help, you know, we should be helping each other, because this is not, there's so much work to do and we have to be doing it together. So that's a long rambling answer, but.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a long rambling question. Yeah, thanks. Questions from folks in the room or folks on Zoom? Scott?
Sure. So I really liked hearing about that Sheila River project. It's really good news. I wonder if you could just tell us about a couple other projects that you're doing currently in New Hampshire, or maybe that are around that threshold, just to give us a little more flavor of what's going on.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. There is so much. We have a climate adaptation I'm not gonna get the names right. Climate adaptation building project, we'll call it that, of you know, working at the municipal level with community leaders to develop climate adaptation plans. That's a project that's been led by someone from the Nature Conservancy in Connecticut, and he's been building this process all around the Northeast, and we're piloting it in New Hampshire. So they just did that in the town of Lebanon. And let's see, we have some other projects I want to share. We're doing a conservation planning project with some partners in the lower Merrimack River watershed. So again, thinking about that spatial science, working with partners and developing kind of a shared roadmap, so to speak, for conservation actions that include it's not just, you know, the conservation plan for that watershed. Now I can't remember exactly when it was created, but it just grayed out the urban areas. It was like, we're just not, you know, like, let's work outside. And so now we're adding in the urban areas. So there's a big project there. And let's see what else. One of a project that I find, I didn't talk about forest management as one of the kind of pillars of this work in the Appalachians, but it absolutely is. I just was trying to filter. So one of the projects we're doing in New Hampshire is our climate resilient forest management work. And so that is working with academic partners, folks that we all know, and doing some experiments and demonstration sites on TNC lands, and then, you know, having a community practice of other land managers to kind of get those management practices out in other lands to enhance ecological resilience under changing climate. So those are some of the flavors of the work. There's a lot of policy work happening. There's a lot of kind of working at the State House, working with our agencies, really trying to take, and we're just at this point in our climate system where we're not going to be able to piece project by project our way out of impacts. We have to be, you know, working at the policy level and at the influence level. So we're doing a lot of that too. Other questions, anyone?
I'm gonna ask another
Okay, that's fine. I'm here.
And this one, I know I'm not the only one with this question, but I don't think my parents are gonna unmute. So I'm wondering if you can, so that was like Megan, the museum director. This is now a question from Megan, Coas County landowner. So I'm really interested in, I think, so between my parents and I, there's 167 acres of well, maybe there's like 5 acres of it is house, but there's 167 acres in Dummer. And we all want to do the right thing. We just don't know what it is. And so I was really interested to learn a little bit more about the like family forest component and sort of what, because I think part of what, it feels odd in some contexts to talk about that being like a small landowner, because I know that for some people, 67 acres is like a huge amount of land, but I also know that in the context we're talking about, it is small. And even though there are 2 contiguous pieces, it's kind of small potatoes, but I guess I'm interested to learn like whether that, like to learn more about the family forest carbon. And if you could just, I don't know, if you could talk a little bit more about that, or you could just send me a link later.
Well, I can
send it to my parents, but.
Yeah, no, I can do both, because it is being rolled out, and there's resources online that are really clear and helpful, like on their website. You can put in your property and you can see if it's eligible. You can see the kinds of I think it's a 30, I'm gonna have to look, no, it's a 20-year agreement. So it's a way, traditionally land protection has happened by, you do a fee acquisition, you own it,
Right.
or you do an easement. This is just another tool in our toolbox where we can have an agreement for 20 years. You're going to follow these kind of practices that are intended to, help, improve forest management and help landowners keep them as forests if those payments are going to help do that. So that's the big idea. And there's a lot of information on how it all works.
And
And
that
then,
was a nice thought. And it worked.
And then also working with local towns and local land trusts to think about the legacy of those lands over time is another great avenue. And so I see Becky has a question about how the Nature Conservancy works with land trusts in the White Mountain region. And so I had that, so this is similar. I had that slide about the grants program. That's one way where land trusts that have projects in the pipeline can apply and get some direct funding from the Nature Conservancy for those projects. And we were also, we did a capacity grant to the Nature Conservation Trust, really recognizing that they're doing really important work in a really important landscape in New Hampshire and wanting to help kind of seed fund and get them going. And so we're really interested in those opportunities as well.
Thanks. Other questions? Becky, did you have more? You unmuted for a second. I didn't know if you wanted to.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks very much. You did a great job. Just to build on the talk that Amy did a couple of years ago on fragmentation. Sarah, you did a nice job at laying out the big picture. One of the thoughts I'm wondering about is, does the Nature Conservancy, among other organizations in the state, is there a possibility of a more strategic approach to where we would like to infill in order to develop larger contiguous habitats? So that when, say, Megan and her family are thinking about, okay, yes, we can set this aside or some portion of it, and if we do that, it'll be like a puzzle piece that will link up some important areas. So I'm just wondering, is there anybody who is taking Amy's concern and saying, here are 5 areas, 10 areas, 20 areas in the White Mountains, and then communicating that to landowners?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wasn't there for Amy's talk, but I will talk about just some of the connectivity work we're doing and how we're thinking about it with partners too. So just in the last few months, I showed the big landscape of the map that had, the waterscape and the resilient connected lands. So we've identified even kind of these subsets of those resilient connected lands. We call kind of our focal lands, our focal sub landscapes within the Appalachians, where we've prioritized even more thinking about where that connectivity is most important. So for us in New Hampshire, it's this region you can kind of picture between the Southern Green Mountains to the White Mountains, that area. And then also north of the White, so if you think about kind of the bridge across from Vermont into Maine, you know, making sure there's connectivity from the southern Green Mountains to the White Mountains and connectivity across that northern part too. And so so yes, there's a bunch of like pretty detailed action mapping, looking at even kind of road crossings to where we need to make sure that we keep that fabric of the network stitched together over time.
And if folks are interested, the talk that was referenced was in January of 2022. Amy Villamania gave who's a professor here at Plymouth State, gave a talk. I don't know if it was the actual title, but the message was "Roads, the Great Fragmentator."
Yeah.
was really
Yeah.
the takeaway. And it was a great talk, thinking about kind of even things that seem innocuous like Woods Road, especially from a fisheries and aquatic standpoint, can be so destructive with old built up culverts and not just thinking about vehicular concerns with roads, but really the water concerns as well.
And this area of kind of transportation and ecology is something I didn't know a lot about until this last few months, and it's super interesting. And there's a lot of really cool research and looking at, like, I just got an email, I think today, about a new map coming through eventually of like all of the roads that get more than 10,000 cars a day. I think that's like a threshold for like the critters are not going to get across those. And so figuring out where those are is like the first priority. And then you can just keep tearing down, thinking about connectivity. There's an awesome question in the chat. Are there ways you're able to get insights from Indigenous populations regarding their stewardship over generations? Yes, and it's a great question. And I think my answer is going to be pretty broad because I'm so new here. And I know that there's really fantastic, so a lot of the work with tribal nations has happened from individual state chapters of the Nature Conservancy with those nations. And so there's really inspiring examples from the Nature Conservancy in Maine, for example. I think one of the slides had a project that it referenced, doing some culvert barrier removal in Maine with, I can't remember which tribal nation. We can look it up.
The Fulton Band of the Mountains.
Did you see that? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's examples like that kind of up and down the range. Here in New Hampshire, we're part of a group of northern Appalachian states that's currently in very early stages of conversation of building an organization to nation relationship with the Odanak. And that's just, it's early stages. These take a lot of time and care. And so that's where we are here at the moment.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.